Okay, good evening, everyone on Zoom and Facebook Live. Good to see you. Tonight we will be studying Talmud and Kabbalah. So we have a very interesting topic. And first we're going to learn about the Talmudic view, and then we'll look into the Kabbalah and find out what mystical dimension we could add to the topic. And tonight's topic is using or watching someone else's property. So just to give a little bit of background of the story of the Torah portion. So it's just after the Torah, more specifically the 10 Commandments, were given on Mount Sinai. That was last week's Torah portion. It was a tremendous revelation. It was a very powerful event, very historic event. And immediately after that, in this week's Torah portion, comes the civil laws. So the laws that govern daily life and issues and questions that arise between people in any society. So the Torah has its own set of civil laws, and theoretically, it could be used by a Jewish court. Of course, one very important principle in Judaism and in the Talmud is that the law of the land is the law. So if you're living in a society where there's another law and there's another court system, and of course we follow that court system. It's a mitzvah to follow that law. But theoretically, if there's a Jewish court and if somebody wants to know the Jewish law, so the Torah has its own set of civil law, and it's quite fascinating to study it, sometimes to compare it to other systems of law. And today we'll be looking into this topic of using or watching over other people's property. And today we're going to talk about four different people. And each of these people are in possession of some property that belongs to someone else. Each of these four people have possession of this property for a different reason. And they also have different degrees of responsibility and liability in case of damage, or if it's lost, stolen, or the like. So we'll start with the Talmud to understand the law and the basic idea of what this is all about. And after that, we'll look into the Kabbalah for a more mystical dimension. So we have four people. The first person we're going to talk about is the unpaid guardian. So the unpaid guardian, in Hebrew, in the Talmud, is called a shomer chinam. So a person is watching over something as a favor. He's not getting paid. There's no compensation for his troubles. So let's say I'm going out of town and I have something that needs to be watched. I have an expensive camera, and I'd like my friend to hold on to it. So my friend is a nice person, and he'll take it for free. He won't charge me anything for watching over it. And this is the case of the unpaid guardian. So the guardian has the responsibility to look after the camera, to take care of it, to be responsible about it, but he's doing it as a complete favor, no compensation for the trouble, whatever trouble it might include. So because this is a favor of the guardian, he's not getting paid for it, so therefore his responsibility is very limited, and his responsibility is minimal. So theoretically, if the object is stolen, or if it's lost, or if there's any other type of damage to the camera, this person is not responsible because he's just doing a favor. So if something happened that wasn't that's not included in the agreement, so he was just doing the best he could, and he's not responsible if something went wrong. So There's only one exception to this case, to the unpaid guardian. There's one time and there's one exception where he would be responsible, and that is if the unpaid guardian is negligent. Okay, so if he does something that he should not have done, and you know, because of his negligence, this camera was lost or stolen, then it's his fault. So if he takes the camera, puts it outside on the street for everyone to see, or he puts it in a place where it doesn't belong, or a place where it could easily fall and get damaged, that's negligence, and then he would be responsible, because he, even though he's not getting paid, and even though there's no compensation involved, but he accepted upon himself this obligation. He accepted upon himself to watch over this object. So if he neglects to do that properly, then he would be responsible. So this is the first person. We have the paid guardian. The unpaid guardian, person who's doing it for free. The second case we have is the case of the paid guardian. So this is quite similar. Again, someone is, let's say, traveling, and they need their stuff to be watched. But this time, the owner is concerned that it should be taken seriously enough, and that the person who's watching it, the guardian, should have more responsibility. So he's willing to pay. He's willing to pay the price. So he says, you know, I'm going for a week. I'll pay you, you know, 100,000 crowns, and you make sure that this will be returned to me safely when I get back. So this paid guardian, he has obviously a greater responsibility in case of an accident, something happens, something goes wrong. The person who's getting paid, it makes sense that he should have more responsibility and more liability for this object, whatever it might be. But this, nevertheless, the paid guardian is not responsible for any type of damage. There are differences. So if the damage or loss could have been avoided, then he's responsible. But if it was unavoidable, if there was nothing he could do, then he is not responsible. So let's say, for example, if there was robbery, somebody just coming into the house, he could have been chased out. The police could have been called, could have sounded the alarm if there was something he could do, and he failed to do so. He neglected to do so. Then then this paid guardian, you know, he's getting paid. This was his responsibility to do whatever he could to protect this object, the camera. And in this case, he did not take whatever action he could have taken to avoid this robbery or this loss, whatever it was. So he is responsible, and he has to, you know, cover the cost of this object and return it, either buy a new one or give its value back to the rightful owner. But if it was something unavoidable, if there was, let's say, an armed robbery, so, you know, there was nothing he could do. He's not going to risk his life for the camera. He's not going to put himself, he's not going to take a bullet for the camera. So if if it's something that's unavoidable, there's an armed robbery, or if there's some type of a natural disaster, or some kind of unexpected storm, or whatever it might be, something that he had no control over, then even though he is getting paid, he's still not responsible, because this was beyond his capability. This was beyond what he was able to, you know, beyond the protection that he was able to provide. And the owner should have taken this into account. You know, he's paying someone to do normal work, but he could only deal with things that are avoidable. If some type of damage or loss is unavoidable, then the owner takes the loss. So this is the third case. I'm sorry, this is the second case. So far we have the unpaid guardian, and we have the paid guardian, and they have different levels of responsibility, different levels of liability in case of whatever damage or loss there might be. Make sense so far? Okay. So the third case, the third person we have is the renter. So the renter is someone pretty self-explanatory. He's paying to use the item. So the item is not in his possession because the owner needs it to be watched. The object is not in his, the object is not under his watch because the owner needs it to be there. Here, the owner is allowing him to use it for a fee. He's renting it out. So let's say you're renting a car. I'll give you my car if you'll pay me the price. So in this case, the renter's responsibility is exactly the same as the responsibility that the paid guardian has. Okay, why do they have the same liability? Why do they have the same responsibility? It's because both the paid guardian and the renter, they're quite similar, because even though one is providing a service and one is using the item, but they're quite similar if you think about it, because they both receive some benefit and they both provide some benefit or service. Okay, so both the paid guardian and the renter, they both receive something and they give something in return. So so the paid guardian is receiving payment, for his troubles and for his work. And the renter also is receiving something. He's receiving the right to use the car. And then on the flip side, you have the guardian has to provide something. So the guardian is providing protection. And you also have the renter who's providing something. The renter is providing payment for the use of the car. Okay, so they're both giving some benefit, and they're both receiving some benefit. And so therefore, they have equal responsibility. The law is, the liability is that if it's something that was avoidable, then they're responsible. If it was something that was unavoidable, then they're not responsible. So if you're driving your car and you're doing the best you could, and someone else breaks the law, someone else takes a red and drives into you, that was unavoidable. There was nothing that you could do. So if the car is damaged, that's not your responsibility. But if you had the opportunity, to save the car in some situation, if there was a potential accident and you had the opportunity, you were able to, let's say, you had a choice where to park your car, and you parked your car in a place where you were not allowed to because they were chopping trees above. So they put cones out there and they didn't let anybody park, but you went ahead and put the car there. So that's you could have, and then the tree falls and damages the car. So you could have avoided that, right? So that's negligence. That's probably negligence. So that's a much more obvious case. But let's say there was a real loss. There was a real loss or damage that was not negligence on his part, but he was able to avoid it. So he saw something coming, he saw the damage coming, he saw something happening, and he could have taken some action to move out of the way or to do something to protect the car, and he didn't, then he would be responsible. So we have the same liability for the paid guardian and for the renter. They both are required to pay for something that was avoidable, but they're not required to pay for something that was unavoidable. And then we have the final case, the final person who is in possession of someone else's object, but this time it's because they're borrowing it. Okay, so here your friend is kind enough to lend something for its use, but it's for free. So the borrower is not paying for the use of the item. It's just a favor that the owner is giving to the borrower. So in this case, there is clearly the borrower is the only one benefiting from this, from receiving this object. And therefore, because there is no benefit to the owner, right? In all the three previous cases, there was benefit to the owner. Either a service was being provided to him, or he was receiving payment for giving the rights to use the object, right? In the case of the rental agreement. But in this case, the borrower is the only one who's benefiting from this agreement, and therefore, because the owner is gaining nothing, the borrower is the only one who has to gain here, is the only one who has to benefit. Therefore, the borrower is responsible for any kind of damage, any kind of loss, regardless of whether or not it was his fault. So there could have been a natural disaster, it could have been an armed robbery, it could have been anything. Because the borrower is just taking a favor, and he's the only one benefiting. The owner is not receiving any payment, not receiving any compensation. He's just doing a favor. So therefore, the borrower takes full responsibility, and no matter what happens, he has to return the item. So if the item was lost or destroyed or damaged, he needs to pay the difference or give the value or buy a new one, return the item to its rightful owner in whatever way is possible. There are a couple of exceptions. Every rule has an exception, right? And one of those exceptions is that if the borrower is just using it normally, and it breaks because of just the normal usage. So if I borrow your computer, and while I'm using the computer, it just freezes and stops working, and that's the end of the computer. Provided that I didn't do anything to cause that. If it just happened because the computer reached its time, or let's say the olden days, people were using animals more than they do today. So you borrow somebody's horse, and while you're riding the horse just collapses and dies. Not because you didn't feed it, not because you mistreated it, only because it was time for the horse to die, and nobody knew in advance. Or you're driving a car, the car was an old car, and at some point the car is going to stop to work. So if it just happens to stop working while it's on the borrower's watch, then the borrower is not responsible. He was only doing what he told the owner he would do. He's not doing anything else. Therefore, this is the exception where he's not responsible. But in any other case, if there was any other type of damage or loss or destruction, then he would be responsible. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen for a moment, and we'll get a quick recap of all of these four people and the laws that cover who is responsible for any type of damage. And here it goes. Okay, so here we have the four people who we talked about: the unpaid guardian, the paid guardian, the renter, and the borrower. Okay, and then we have some cases over here. We have a case where the person was negligent, and then we have cases where there were damages. So sometimes the damages were avoidable, and sometimes the damages were unavoidable. So now the question is, who is responsible? Is the person who has the object, the person who's using the object, or the person who's watching the object, are they responsible for whatever loss or damage there was here? Okay, so first we're going to talk about the unpaid guardian, because he's doing it for free, just providing a free service as a favor. So he's not responsible for other things, but if he's negligent, then he will be responsible. So that's yes, he is responsible, and it's red because he has to pay. But he's not responsible for any other types of damages. So even if it was avoidable, but he's just doing a favor. So, you know, he does not have to go out of his way. If he's a nice person, then he could go out of his way and try to avoid this damage or loss, whatever it might be. But he's not responsible, and he's not required, he's not obligated to make sure that it doesn't become that it's not damaged, unless that would be considered negligence. So some cases of not taking action could be considered negligence, but assuming that he was not negligent, he's not responsible. Then we have the paid guardian. So the paid guardian, of course, is responsible if he was negligent, but because he is I think I made a mistake there. He is responsible for avoidable damages. That's a mistake. That should have been a yes. Paid guardian is responsible for avoidable damages, but he's not responsible for unavoidable damages. Then comes the renter. The renter, of course, is responsible for negligence. He is responsible for avoidable damages, but he's not responsible for unavoidable damages. And then comes the borrower, who is responsible in every single case, even where it's not his fault, he is responsible. So there's only one mistake on this chart. The paid guardian should be the same as the renter. So the paid guardian actually is responsible if the damage was avoidable. Okay. So there you have it. This is the Talmud. This concludes the civil laws, the framework of the agreement. Obviously, there are many more details, but this is the basic understanding of how you know, the relationship between the guardian and the owner, who is responsible in case of any type of damage or loss. So moving right along, now we're going to look at the Kabbalah. We're going to look for a more Kabbalistic and esoteric dimension to these very technical and civil laws, and we'll see how the Kabbalah takes these four people and really turns it into a very important life lesson and a very interesting Kabbalistic concept. So if we look into the Torah and try to find what is a person's role in the world, so we find in the very beginning, person is considered to be a guardian. That is our role. And like the verse says, I have it in front of me, just one verse. And God took the man and placed him in the Garden of Eden to work it and to keep it. La'avda u'lashamra. Probably a better translation would be to guard it. L'shamra, it comes from the word shomer, the guard, which is the same word as we've been using all along, the guardian. So the first person, Adam, was placed into the Garden of Eden, and his responsibility was to safeguard it and to what were the words again? To work it and to guard it. Okay, so what is our role in the world? We are guardians. So God entrusted us with the world, and we have a certain responsibility. Our responsibility is to safeguard it and to develop the world, to develop the resources that we have, the resources that God created and made available to us. So when you think of your role as a guardian, you know, in this world, so we could ask similar questions and the same questions that we ask about guardians and owners. So questions like, who is the owner and who is responsible? So the same questions that the Talmud asked, now the Kabbalah could ask, because now we're talking about people, we're talking about the world. And the world is the object. The world is what we're responsible for. It's what we're supposed to safeguard. It's what we're supposed to keep. It's what we're supposed to develop. But now we could ask these questions to understand from a legal perspective. We could ask some similar questions. Who is the owner? Who's responsible? So if we're thinking about people and we're thinking about life in general, so the questions are, whose life is it, right? Whose life is it? So who is the owner of our life? What are our responsibilities? And what kind of compensation could I expect in exchange for my services that I provide? I'm guarding the world. I'm safeguarding. I'm developing whatever resources. So these are fair questions, right? So we're saying that we are the guardians of the world. So who's hiring us? Are we getting paid? Who's the owner? What's the compensation? What's the responsibilities? These things are, this is what the Kabbalah is concerned about, and this is what we could try to find answers to. And the Kabbalah takes these four types of people, these four guardians. They're not all guardians, but in a way they all are guardians because they're all watching over something. Sometimes they're using it, the renter, the borrower, but they're still guardians because they're watching it at the same time. So the Kabbalah says that these four guardians represent four attitudes and four approaches that we could take and that we could look at life at, four ways that we could look at life, four approaches to life itself. The first one is the unpaid guardian. The unpaid guardian is, the person who's doing the favor, not receiving anything in return. So this represents a person who is completely selfless in life in general. So they're always focusing on helping others, on being there for others. Their life is about something bigger than themselves. They don't focus on themselves at all. They're completely selfless, just like the unpaid guardian is doing a complete favor, not receiving anything in return. This is the unpaid guardian, is the selfless person. And such a person really epitomizes what the Talmud says. The Talmud says, and I quote, "I was only created to serve my Creator." Right? So someone who thinks like that, someone who thinks that life is not about me, it's about something bigger than me. It's about others. It's about other people. It's about God. It's about my mission. It's about my purpose. Such a person, this is really epitomizes what the Talmud says, that I was only created to serve my Creator. So this is the unpaid guardian. He sees his life, his talents, his possessions. He sees everything as God's property. It's placed in his trust. He's watching over it, and he doesn't feel that he deserves something in exchange for his work. He's an unpaid guardian. He's doing this because this is the right thing to do. This needs to be done, and doesn't expect anything in return. On the contrary, he feels that everything he has does not belong to him. Rather, he's trusted with it, and now let's see what he's going to do with it. So this is the first person that the Kabbalah talks about, the unpaid guardian. Then on the other extreme, we have the borrower. Borrower is the one who is like we explained in the Talmud, he's receiving all the benefit. Okay, so the owner does not receive any kind of compensation, any kind of payment. So the only person benefiting here is the borrower. And this is a person who looks at life and sees life as as he sees self-fulfillment as the purpose of life. So he's at the center, and everything is about him. He may acknowledge that there is a higher being, and there's a higher power, and there's a higher purpose, and there are other things that are important in the world. But when it comes down to it, he doesn't feel like he owes anyone anything. He just feels like looking after himself and his own interests and his own desires and his own comforts. This is the borrower who is only receiving but not giving anything in return. So now we have the two extremes. And in the middle, we have the paid guardian and we have the renter. These are the ones that the Kabbalah says are the middle ones. Just like in the Talmud, they have an in-between kind of responsibility. So on the one hand, they're required to pay for certain damages that are avoidable, but they're not responsible to pay for unavoidable damages. So here too, the Talmud says that they're kind of in between. And what this means is that both the renter and the paid guardian, the answer to the so they have certain things in common, but so in terms of what they're giving and in terms of what they're receiving is the same, right? So what they expect to receive and what they expect to give is the same. But then there is a fundamental difference between them on the issue of why are we here? What is the purpose for life, right? So we have the paid guardian. What is the guardian's job? The paid guardian's job is to guard. So he understands that there's an owner, there's an object, and my job is to take care. To take care of this object, take care of the world, do my part for society, for the world, for others. So that's the paid guardian. And then you have the renter. The renter is focused on himself. It's focused on using whatever item it is, using the object. So perhaps their approach to life is different, but in the end, they're kind of giving and receiving in the same way, right? Because the paid guardian does expect something in return. He's expecting to get paid. So on the one hand, he's saying, yes, life is about something bigger than myself, but I also want to enhance myself. I want to fulfill my own desires. So he knows that he has to earn this privilege. He's providing something. He's giving something, giving a service, doing something for society, doing something for the world, doing something for God, but also wants something in return. Also wants payment. Also wants his own enhancement of his own self. And then we have the spiritual renter, who might be coming from another place. He might be coming from a place of, it's about me, I'm renting the item, but he does understand that he has to give something. To give something in return. So he has to give certain service, he has to give certain payment. And this is about understanding that life is not just about himself, it's about a higher purpose. Okay, so these were the four types of people. On the one hand, we had on the first one we had was the unpaid guardian. He was the selfless person who saw life as only about something higher, something greater, about others. Person is completely selfless, sees all of what he has, all of his talents, all of his blessing and opportunities, all of this as a loan to him, or under his watch, but does not belong to him. He's entrusted with it. And this is the person who's completely selfless. On the other extreme, we have the borrower, who is only thinking about himself. He's self-centered and looks at life as self-enhancement and running after his own desires, comforts, and interests. And then in the middle, we have the paid guardian and the renter. So the paid guardian understands that he's a guardian, knows that his life doesn't belong to him. He's entrusted with what he has, but he also and he's willing to do a lot for others, for the community, for God, for society. But at the same time, he's expecting to get paid. He wants what he wants. And the renter also is very similar, because the renter is the one who sees himself kind of at the center, because he is the renter, but at the same time understands that he has to pay for that privilege, he has to pay for that right. So again, he's providing a certain payment, providing a certain service, and he's going to be there for others. He's gonna go out of his way. He's a good person, focusing not just on himself, but on others as well, and on the bigger picture, and making this world a better place. Our sages tell us that God deals with a person in the manner in which we behave, and in the manner in which we define our relationship with God. So in a way, we're the ones who initiate, the tone and the basis for the relationship, and then according to that, God deals with us. And the founder of Hasidism, a very famous person, his name is the Baal Shem Tov, lived about 300 years ago. He quoted the verse in Psalms, Tehillim, that says, God is your shadow. God is your shadow. So what does this mean? He attached this idea to this verse, saying that just like a shadow follows a person wherever you go, in the same way, so too God kind of follows the way we initiate and the way we set the tone for our relationship. And the idea is that just like we saw in the Talmud, the more a person gives of himself, so take the extremely selfless person who's giving everything for free, not taking anything in return. So the more this is not for the average person. This is most people are some kind of balance, some kind of in between, between the unpaid guardian and the borrower. Most people are somewhere in the middle. But the more selfless we are, and the more dedicated and committed we are to a higher purpose, to being there for other people, and to focusing on something bigger and greater than ourselves, focusing on making this world a better place, focusing on making this world a more godly place, bringing more mitzvahs into our lives, helping people whenever we have the opportunity. The more we do this, the more responsibility we're putting on God, right? So the more you think about yourself, the more you put yourself at the center, like the borrower, the more self-centered you are, and the more selfish you are, the more responsibility for life you're accepting upon yourself. So you're setting the tone for the relationship. And so in a way, if something happens, it's there's some damage, there's some loss, it's your responsibility, because you're the borrower. But the more we do for others, and the more selfless we are, and the more dedicated we are to something greater than ourselves, then we're removing responsibility from ourselves and putting it on to God, so to speak. So not that we're trying to get away easy, but it's kind of it's kind of like a natural consequence. So if you're doing a favor, you're not responsible for whatever damage or loss there was. If you're a borrower, then you're responsible for everything. So the more you are like the unpaid guardian, the more responsibility you're throwing onto God. Basically the idea is, I'm doing so much for you. Now, God, it's your turn. Now you look after me. You make sure that I have what I need. And this is what the Baal Shem Tov says, that God deals with you the way you deal with him. And the borrower is the opposite. The borrower is going the opposite way. I just want to think about myself. I want to be selfish. So God says, okay, but if there's some loss or damage, it's going to be on you. So most of us are in the middle, but from time to time, we could hopefully take a moment to think about what could we do to be a little bit more like the unpaid guardian. What could we do to be a little bit more selfless, to do another act, another good deed, another mitzvah for someone else, for God? And automatically at the same time, we are also telling God, look what we're doing for you. Look what we're doing for the world. We are, we're fulfilling our mission. We're here. We're supposed to safeguard the world. We're supposed to protect the world, develop it, and not just the world itself, but society, community, our neighbors, our family, our friends. We're doing our part. Now you look after us.